Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me with this interview with Avi Jorisch. We're speaking to Avi right now in Israel, and Avi is the author of this book, Thou Shalt Innovate, How Israeli Ingenuity Repairs the World. I have my notes here, but I first met Avi in March 2018 at APAC, which meets every year in Washington, D.C. APAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and Avi spoke on the committee. You spoke in several sessions, but the first session that I saw you speak in was the Israeli ethos, contributing to the world, responding to crisis, and saving lives. And I was fascinated by that topic, Avi, and all the speakers who you were with. And it's hard to pick sessions there. There are often a choice of 20, 30, 40 sessions to choose at any given time. But you spoke on a very distinguished panel. That's where I learned about your book, and that's where I learned about you. And then I saw you speak 2 more times after that. So I'm very excited to have you here with us. So welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining this evening. I appreciate it. Greetings from Jerusalem.
Okay. That was my next question. Where in Israel are we speaking to you? So I just want to, before we get into your book, I'm just very fascinated about your journey that brought you to writing this book. You made Aliyah with your family, and you moved to Israel from New York City when you were 4 years old. That's right. I saw the picture in your book of you sitting on Menachem Begin's lap. But then your family moved back to the United States, and then you went back to the Middle East. So if you could just talk about what brought you back to the Middle East and the studies that you pursued in Egypt and back to Washington, D.C.
So as you mentioned, we made Aliyah when I was a small child, and I point out in the book that I sat on Menachem Begin's lap. It was the day after he had signed the peace agreement with Egypt, and he was absolutely radiant, and he wanted to meet families that were making Aliyah over the course of the next few days. And we were very lucky. We got to meet him. And that left quite an impression on a young boy. And we, as you pointed out, moved back to the States a few years later. And then I went back often as a teenager. And then I did my junior year abroad at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where I was studying Middle East studies, and then came back to do a master's degree in Islamic history and Arabic. From there, I moved to Egypt, where I lived for just over about a year and a half. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. and took a position in a variety of think tanks and other institutions. And I wrote over the course of 2001 to 2014, when I started working on this book, I wrote 4 books. My first was on Hezbollah, on their television station Al-Manar. And I started watching Al-Manar when I was living in Egypt and realized this was owned and operated by Hezbollah. And it was reaching about 25 million viewers a day, which is more viewers combined than Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and CNN combined. And I then took a variety of jobs in the government. I wrote another book. I wrote 2 more books on money laundering and terrorism finance. And my last book was on Iran's banking sector, where I exposed how Iran was marching towards the bomb by leveraging the international financial system. And so I exposed the 59 international banks around the world that were providing the Islamic Republic with correspondent banking services, which is the fuel that allows a bank to actually operate. And that had great success. I worked hand in glove with organizations like AIPAC to then pass a law called CISADA, the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Divestment Act, which essentially leveraged a lot of the language in my book to institute the sanctions regime against Iran and forcing banks around the world to choose between our market and the Iranian market. And most of those banks ultimately chose the US market and began choking Iran out of the international financial sector. And then in 2000, we now have 3 kids. And in the summer of 2014, we had 2 children, and we spent the entirety of the war here in Jerusalem. And I will tell you, on the one hand, I was extraordinarily depressed. It was a very, very heated summer. It was the Operation Protective Edge. And we often went into bomb shelters. And I experienced the comfort and safety of the Iron Dome. And as we were going in and out of bomb shelters, I learned some amazing statistics that it had a 90% success rate. This was the first time in human history that a missile defense system literally shot a rocket out of the sky. I mean, that really is like Star Wars. And while on the one hand, I was pretty depressed, Hamas was building these tunnels into Israel. Syria had descended into civil war. Iran was still marching towards the bomb. Hezbollah was taking over, politically speaking, Lebanon. There were terrorist attacks all over the Sinai Peninsula. So on the one hand, I was pretty depressed. On the other hand, I began realizing that there were incredible innovations that were coming out of Israel that were improving the lives of billions of people around the world. And the more I dug into this story, I began to realize, we all know that Israel is a technological powerhouse. The country has more startups combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. Outside of North America, it has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country. And that really does speak to the technological prowess of the country. But I really wanted to explore these innovations that were not necessarily startups, but these organizations and individuals that were improving the lives of so many people around the world when it comes to water, agriculture, medicine, science. I knew this was a story that I needed and wanted to explore. And I spent the next few years exploring that story. And with your permission, I'll just give a few examples from the book, if that's okay. Or do you want to?
No, that's definitely what I wanted to do. I have written down every chapter of your book because it would be hard for me to select which innovation and invention is the most fascinating of all. But if you could start with the very first chapter, which is the Israel DNA. I just love how you write about, from the prophet Isaiah, that the Jewish people should act as a light unto the nations. Herzl, Golda Meir, going back thousands of years of what it is about the Jewish DNA that wants to repair the world. And what Herzl said, I'll just read Herzl's quote to people because I feel like it says it all. Whatever we attempt for our own benefit will redound mightily and beneficially to the good of all mankind. Theodore Herzl said that in 1896. And then if you could talk about the first chapter, Israel DNA, and then we'll go into whatever chapters you want to talk about.
Some, none, all, whatever makes you happy. Let me begin by saying that there's no single narrative that fully describes the state of Israel. There's no single narrative. But the stories in my book, allegorically speaking, are the heart and soul of the state of Israel. These innovations really speak to the Zionist ideal, a more perfect union that the country has tried to establish. But there is no single narrative. But there's also no denying that the country has extraordinary innovators that are bound together not by religion, money, or stature, but rather by a desire to save lives and make the world a better place. And the stories that bring light to the world are the stories that I wanted to explore. And I don't mean to suggest that there are not other stories, there are not other narratives that describe the state of Israel, but this is one that I found inspiring and one that I think really does these stories bring light to the world. And I wanted to shed light on that particular series of stories. And I always like to think about the DNA of the state of Israel really standing on three legs. You have the religious component, there's a secular component, and there's a diversity component. Let me go through all three. Let me start with diversity. The country has an extraordinary number of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. You have Arabs, you have secular, you have religious, you have Jews from all over the world. And diversity, I think, is the fuel that's part of that really powers this particular country. It just is a rich set of individuals, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Then you have strong secular institutions. You have a highly innovative military, and you have extraordinary universities like the Technion, Tel Aviv University, the Hebrew University, that are pillars of really their secular institutions at their heart. And then you have the religious teachings that have been happening over the course of the last, it depends on where you actually put it, but somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 years. For the last 1,500 years, you have the Aleinu prayer, which calls upon us to improve the world. We believe that we have a social contract with God to spread morality and social justice. The Mishnah, no less than 10 times, calls upon us to repair the world and engage in tikkun olam, literally to repair the world, no less than 10 times for those that are less advantaged than we are. You have the prophet Isaiah that calls upon us to be a light onto the nations. And I think at the very essence, when I bless my children on Friday night, or when we make Havdalah on Saturday night, we make the following blessing, which I think is really interesting. Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, he who separates between the mundane and the holy. In Judaism, on one foot, if I had to put it on one foot, is the striving to elevate the mundane and make it holy. And when you repeat for 3,000 years, repair the world, cure the sick, help the needy, feed the hungry, I tend to think that it has an impact on the DNA of your people. And so when you combine these strong religious teachings with secular institutions that are valued in the country and diversity, the country is now producing technology that in large part focuses on helping those in need. Now, Israel was recently voted among the top 10 most innovative countries in the world. And there's lots of other countries on that list. But I think what makes Israel unique are these stories that I feature in my book that really do bring light to the world. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about not only what makes country innovative, but what countries around the world are actually making an impact to make the world better. And so that really is where my journey began on the book. And I interviewed people in their homes, on park benches and pizza shops. And I really had a good sense for what made them tick. And not everyone would start it off by saying, I want to make the world a better place. But by their actions, the end product ended up improving the lives of billions of people around the world. And I think that is an interesting story that most people are not aware of. People are aware, in the best of cases, people are aware of the fact that Israel is a technological startup nation. In the worst of cases, people tend to think of this as a country that is mired in war and terrorism, sand and camels. And this is the way I hope people start to also understand the state of Israel, that it's not just a technological powerhouse, but many of its innovations are making the world better and improving the lives of billions of people.
I think just a philosophy, just tikkun olam, wanting to make the world a better place and repeating it for thousands of years, combined with being in Israel, surrounded by enemies, that it's mandatory that everybody joins the army, that state of mind. I know Israel's one of the happiest places in the world. And I think people just think outside the box. I think children are more adventurous there. I think people are more challenged in Israel. And I think you mentioned all the startup companies. I think the government is more supportive of startups and the incubator projects.
Certainly, there's a tremendous number of government programs that encourage you to fail. And that is an interesting concept. Unless you have failed in Israel, people look at you a little bit funny. And I don't mean to, for those that are on the call, I don't mean to put rose-colored glasses when it comes to Israel. Everything, the country does not lack for problems with the Palestinians, problems with the education system. I mean, we could go chapter and verse on the problems that the country faces. But this is also part of the story. And this part of the story, I think, really, it's certainly, I hope you read the book, the participants today, and then I hope that it inspires you just as much as it inspired me. Because you look at these innovations, and ultimately, at their very essence, it's about compassion. And if you can think about the state of Israel, these are the people that we really ought to be thinking of as the happy portion of the Zionist story. These are the people that we ought to be introducing to our children and emulating to the degree that we can, because these innovations are making the world better. This idea of tikkun olam just for the sake of being tikkun olam is one thing. I really want to tie back the idea of tikkun olam to the idea of Jewish history and Jewish philosophy, this idea of mitzvahs, this idea of engaging in a good deed, the 613 mitzvot, and the idea of tying tikkun olam to a Jewish context, I think is really interesting.
There are so many chapters in your book that are interesting. I don't know which ones you want to talk about. One that I think...
Why don't you read each of the chapters, and we can go through quickly at least what they are, and then you can choose any of the chapters that make sense to you.
I'm not sure if this was in a chapter or in the introduction. It's in your chapter called Jews Cannot Remain Indifferent. I just want to read part of your book. It was after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, and I feel like it sums up how Israel is often first on the scene of any crisis, friend or foe, diplomatic relations or not. Israel will at least offer help or be there to offer help. So in this chapter, you talk about Colonel Ariel Bar, the IDF's chief medical officer, and that when he got the call that there was an earthquake in Haiti, he rushed home, packed a small bag, and he was on a plane soon. It said he arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in time to make the flight. Barr's plane took off without receiving permission to land in Port-au-Prince or knowing what to expect when they arrived. The medical crew didn't know if they would have room to set up their sprawling 26-tent hospital or how they would unload the 80 tons of equipment they were carrying. Israel's medical team was the first to arrive on location before any other country. Within 12 hours, they constructed what many doctors and policymakers have hailed as one of the best field hospitals ever built. In the ensuing weeks, Israeli surgeons performed hundreds of operations, saved countless vital organs, delivered babies, and provided care to newborns. In one harrowing moment, an Israeli officer donated blood to save the life of a 3-day-old infant. And alongside their canine team, after 8 days of searching, rescue officials erupted in joy when they found a man alive, buried deep in the rubble. As former US President Bill Clinton put it, I don't know what we would have done without the Israeli hospital in Haiti. And then at the end of that page, that Colonel Bar, the Israeli colonel, said, when we save the life of one person, we feel that we saved the world. So we saved the world several times in this mission. So that speaks to the Israeli, the humanitarian heart, the wanting to save lives wherever. So yes, let me read the chapters, and then we could talk about it. I know
when you give the chapter titles, I'll go through on like a line or two what it is, and then we can either keep going or we can ask the participants. I mean, really, I'll take the conversation wherever you go.
Okay, yes, I did right. You came up with clever titles for each chapter, so I had to sort of translate. The Uber of ambulances. That was a great one too. That was a great one. So let me read them. You give a brief 1 or 2 line, and then I'll unmute people, and we could pick which we want.
So the Uber of ambulances is about United Hatzalah, an organization that has created 3 things. One, an army of emergency responders, 5,000 of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It gives every one of those emergency responders has an app on their phone which calls the 5 nearest individuals to the scene of an emergency. It acts like Uber, but instead of hailing a cab, it hails the 5 nearest emergency responders. And it gives many of them something called an ambucycle, which is like a Pizza Hut moped with a box in the back with medical supplies. And as a result of United Hatzalah, they have cut down the time it takes an emergency responder to arrive at a scene from 20 minutes down to the national average is 3 minutes. And in major cities, it's 90 seconds.
That is amazing. They should have that everywhere, in every country.
Is interestingly, most if not all these innovations have now gone around the planet, and their models are now being used. United Hatzalah's model is now available in 20 countries to some degree or another around the world, and in 1 major city in the United States, in Jersey City, right across the river from New York.
I live on Long Island. I'm very close to Northwell Health, which is I believe the largest employer in New York State. Right where I am in the New Hyde Park, Roslyn area, there are thousands. You could imagine there are thousands of doctors. These people should all be on this Uber network. On this. And
there's no reason. I mean, this is cheap. This is scalable. We all have smartphones. Every doctor in the country has a smartphone.
What was interesting in that chapter, and I know we could go into it more, when you were telling the story of how the guy is it called an invention or an innovation?
Either. I mean, they're both accurate.
But it was a story of how somebody was having a heart attack, I think, in this story. And it took a while, however long, for the ambulances to come. And a doctor right down the street didn't know that this emergency was happening. Oh, this is the guy who I think invented it.
So let me break this down for
Okay.
Let's assume I were to have, let's say we were in the same room, okay, in Long Island, and I were to have a heart attack. What would you do? You would likely call 911.
Yes.
You call 911. And on average, 20 minutes later, an ambulance would arrive. On average, the 20-minute average is all over the country and in Israel as well. And that was too long for my colleague Ellie Beer, in a country that really has been mired in war for 70 years and sees terrorism on a regular basis. That was too long. And so he wanted to cut down the time. And so now, by using technology that you can literally call the 5 nearest individuals, we have cut down the time to 3 minutes anywhere in Israel. And when you think about the number of lives that are saved, it's extraordinary. And there is no reason why you shouldn't have this anywhere in the world. There really is no reason. We all have smartphones. Many of our communities around the States can certainly afford these cheap mopeds with the boxes in the back with medical supplies.
Yes. I mean, anyone who's a doctor would help if they just know that somebody down the block needs help.
Correct.
So, okay, the next one drop at a time, drip irrigation, which is fascinating. So it's revolutionary.
So drip irrigation is used by over 1 billion farmers around the world. And for your participants that don't know, Israel is the world's only water superpower. Israel has employed 5 or so major water innovations to make it water independent from its neighbors and from the weather. It now has a water surplus. And it used drip irrigation as one. It's for you gardeners. It's that little small plastic device that provides a micro amounts of water. It uses 1/3 of the water and it doubles the yield. Israel has 5 desalination plants that provides 80% of the country's potable water needs. Israel is the world's leader when it comes to recycling of wastewater. Let me be clear what that means. When we flush our toilet in the United States, we tend to think of our sewage as a nuisance. Not so in Israel. In Israel, water authorities will remove the waste, and then they will recycle. They will clean the water 5 times, and they will recycle 90% of their water for their agricultural needs. The country also has a early warning detection system in every major city in the sewage and water pipes, so that if there's a leak, water authorities know about it immediately. And finally is the 2-button toilet. So big flush, little flush. And some of those innovations were created in Israel. Others were simply perfected. Drip irrigation was created in Israel. Desalination was actually created in the United States by a man who made Aliyah and perfected it 2 years later at Ben Gurion University. The 2-button toilet was created in the United States, but really we don't use it to a great degree in the States. And recycling of wastewater, Israel is the world's leader at 90%. The next country down for comparison is Spain at 18%. And we in the United States recycle on average 8 to 9%. And Israel didn't create that, but it has certainly perfected it. And the early warning detection system is called Takadu, and that was created here in Israel.
Would you give the stats on drip irrigation? I think it uses 1/3 less water and produces 30% more crops. Is that correct?
50% more crops.
50% more crops. Also, I don't know if this was in the same chapter where the drip irrigation is paired with GPS, or there's some computer technology in there where it gives the water, it's down to the exact plant, so that if one plant needs more water will go to it.
Correct. Israel really has done a great job in leveraging low tech, which is this little plastic tube, and combining it with high tech. And when you look at a water scarce planet, let's just take 2 countries in particular. You have Egypt, which by 2025, that's in 7 years, is going to run out of water. And Iran, in about 20 years, over 50% of their citizens will become water refugees. And as I think about the next few years in the region, I'm actually pretty excited. Here you have Israel, which is a global problem solver. It's taking global problems and it is creating solutions to it. And when you look at a country like Egypt, I tend to think that Egypt and Israel will become much, much, much closer over the course of the next 7 years. And in Iran, I hope that they will stop pointing their missiles towards Israel, and instead, I predict that they'll be begging Israel for their water exports in the next 20 years. And so when I look around and I think about countries that are innovative, countries that are solving global problems, Israel certainly, I don't know where it is on the list, but it's certainly at the top of the list. And so I'm very, very excited for Israel's future. Again, it doesn't lack for problems, but this idea that it is actively engaging in trying to solve global problems, that really is exciting. You can take the top 10 problems afflicting the planet today, and I'm confident that you'll find an Israeli that is trying to solve those problems.
At APAC, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke about that, how this technology, specifically about Iran and other countries in the Middle East, how they'll be coming to us for help in the future. That's what you were talking about, being the water situation.
I tend to think of this as follows. I really believe that after we have finally met our destiny as the Jewish people, we have been praying and waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. Not only 70 years ago, when Ben Gurion stood at the lectern, he said two things. One, Jews around the world, you are welcome to come home. The gates are officially open. But he also said something else. He said, and I quote, Israel has the great privilege and obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 20th century. He seemed to be saying that at the very center of the mission of the state of Israel is not only to enrich its own citizens, but to solve problems around the world. And again, it's not the only narrative of the state of Israel, but it's certainly it is the Zionist ideal. And we're seeing that today. We have been waiting for this moment for 3,000 years, not only to have our own state and our own home, but also the ability to influence and shape our surroundings. And we're now leveraging technology to make the world better.
This was built into the very structure of the beginnings of the founding of State of Israel, because Ben Gurion and Golda Meir, although they had their ups and downs throughout the history of their lives, at the very beginning in 1948, when Golda Meir was the finance minister, she reached out to Ben Gurion to say we have to help Africa, and she established Mashav.
And actually it was established 4 years before USAID. Now look, it's certainly Israel did this in part because of self-enlightened interest, right? It knew that it didn't have a lot of friends, and this is one of the way of winning friends and influencing others. But there's no doubt, there was also the idea that Israel had the ability to solve these problems and wanted to share that know-how. When you look at a country that didn't have much, by 1958 it established Mashav, which is the equivalent of USAID. And so it has always looked to move beyond the borders of the state of Israel and help those that are in need. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but certainly Israel has striven to make that happen.
Okay, the next chapter in your book, Real Iron Men, you spoke about that in the beginning, the impact that Iron Dome had on your life, and it was almost a catalyst for...
I'll share with you an interesting story. When we went to APAC, it was this year. For those of you that attend the policy conference, this year was the first year that there was in the village was an Iron Dome battery.
That was amazing. I couldn't believe I was seeing it with my own eyes. I'll post pictures of it.
I take my children to policy conference, and my middle son, I start the book with the story of going into a bomb shelter and how my middle son reacted. And when we were at policy conference, he said, Daddy, that what saved our lives. And you think about this idea that this Star Wars contraption is a defensive weapon. This is a weapon that shoots projectiles out of the sky and really prevents it. Were these projectiles to hit major population centers in Israel, Israeli policymakers would be forced to send in ground troops, and a lot more lives would be lost were it not for this particular innovation.
Yes. Okay. The next chapter in your book, Modern Day Joseph. That's another amazing story.
So I want you to think about a Ziploc bag, and a Ziploc bag that in this case is an acrylic bag, and it holds between 1 and 100 tons of grain. It has been used in over 100 countries around the world. Farmers put in their grains, and instead of having to use harmful pesticides, they are able to seal the bag shut and asphyxiate all the bugs and kill them because there's no oxygen. So low tech, but high impact.
That was amazing. The next chapter, the fourth day.
So Israel, Harry Tzvi Tabor was the first chief scientist of the state of Israel. He made Aliyah from the UK. And he created something called the Dud Shemesh, which is a solar water collector. It's on every roof in Israel. Essentially, it allows you to heat water. This was the world's first commercially available solar panel. He realized that Israel was going to go bankrupt because Israelis like to take a hot shower. Israel, when in the 50s, didn't have much. And so he looked around and thought, the one thing that this country has in large amounts is sunshine. And so he created the world's first commercially viable solar panel, and it is now the basis of all solar technology around the world.
And I think in your book it says that 90% of all Israelis use this technology. They all use solar energy to heat their water, and it's on every home. It's a part of a building code that all construction must have it.
And interestingly, for a long time, the Knesset did not want to pass a law because people thought it was ugly. And Harry Tzvi Tabor lobbied for it. He said, who cares if it's ugly? It saves electricity and it saves a precious resource, and it saves hundreds of millions of shekels every year.
Okay, the lame shall walk. This is amazing.
For those of you that have not seen the exoskeleton, Amit Gopher became a quadriplegic and became very depressed. I encourage you to go on YouTube and type in the word exoskeleton, and you'll see some of these amazing videos of paraplegics, those that don't have the use of their legs, that have strapped on this robotic device onto their legs with a battery on the back and with crutches, which allows paraplegics to not only walk again, but they're now running marathons for the first time in history. And Amit Gopher himself was a quadriplegic, and so he did not, ironically, benefit from his own device. So a few years ago, he created something called the Up and Ride, which is a Segway-like device that allows quadriplegics to stand up and zip around and see their loved ones at eye level.
I forgot what animal you related it to in the book, the exoskeleton. Is it a lizard? Is it a beetle?
It's think about it as either a crab or a scorpion.
A scorpion. I think scorpion.
Which has an exoskeleton on the outside of its body, as opposed to a human, which has a skeleton on the inside of their body.
Amazing. The next one, GPS for the brain.
So this is the largest Arab-Israeli technology company. It's called Alpha Omega, which is a reference from the book of Revelation. And it basically, I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And for those of you that have a colleague or a friend with Parkinson's, you will know that it's a neurological disease that often is treated with something called deep brain stimulation. It's an electrode that is placed on the inside of the brain, and you pulse it like a pacemaker for the heart. The only problem is, if you don't get to the exact spot in the brain, you can literally kill someone. So deep brain stimulation was started in the 70s or 80s, late 70s, early 80s, in France. And then Chagai Bergman, which is a professor at the Hebrew University, discovered that if you pulse the basal ganglia on the back of the brain, you can treat Parkinson's. Like I said, the only problem is getting it to the exact spot. And so here comes an Alpha Omega, which realized that every part of the brain emits a unique sound signature. And so their technology allows brain surgeons to get to the exact spot in the brain, and their technology is used in hundreds of hospitals around the world.
Amazing. I'm wondering if we should go through every other, there aren't too many chapters left. I do want to leave time for Q&A, and I definitely want to get to the BMensch.
Sure.
But let's see. Let's just move on. How about we'll do precision? Eye on the spine.
So this is a company that created the world's first artificially intelligent robot that allows spine surgeons to get to the exact spot in the spine so that you don't actually have someone who becomes a quadriplegic or paraplegic. And that technology is obviously used in hundreds of hospitals around the world as well, including Europe.
That's amazing how they take between computer programs and x-rays and CAT scans, they create a 3D model of the back, and computers go in to drill the holes in the back.
Robots. Correct, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's amazing. Let's see, there's the emergency bandage. Oh, let me tell you what it's, a better Band-Aid.
So the emergency bandage is standard issue in the U.S. military, the Israeli military, New Zealand, Australia, and some members of NATO. It was actually used to save the life of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords when she was shot in the head. It is a bandage that really seals up the wound very, very quickly and it saves countless numbers of lives.
Okay. I thought the bird, wait, let me see what the birds and planes one was. Was that a higher calling or balancing heaven and earth?
A higher calling is Israel. Israel discovered, Rafi Meshulam, a professor at the Hebrew University, discovered the chemical underpinnings of marijuana.
All right.
And Israel is the world's leader today in medical marijuana research. And then between heaven and earth is a story of Yossi Lashem, known as the Birdman. He figured out how to decouple planes and birds. Israel has over 1 billion birds that traverse its skies every single year. And he flew with the birds in order to figure out their migration patterns. And he has figured out during migration season how to ensure to the greatest degree possible that birds don't hit planes, bringing them down.
That's amazing, because despite all of Israel's amazing technology, many planes were downed because of birds.
Correct. And we have not a small number in the United States as well, and they're using this technology.
And it's been decreased by a significant percentage.
Millions of dollars are saved every single year as a result of this research.
And lives. Okay. I'd love to get to your chapter, Be a Mensch, and then we will open this up for Q&A.
So my Be a Mensch chapter, this was a few years ago. My son came home from work, and my son was, my wife did not look particularly happy. And she encouraged my son at the time to tell his father what he had done. He was not too keen to do so. And so my wife said to me, Aiden, my oldest, told a homeless person that he was a very bad man. And I felt really bad. I was not particular. And so I thought of my Holocaust survivor grandparents. I thought of my innovators. And I asked my son to put his shoes on and a coat on. I asked him where we were going. I said, we're going to go on a mission. We got about halfway down the block, and I knelt down. And I asked him, why did you say that to this homeless person? And he didn't know the answer to that. And so we only have 5 rules in the Jorisch home. And I asked him, I said, Aiden, what are the 5 rules in our home? And we only have 5. And so he was all too pleased to tell me. Rule number 1, be a mensch, not a wilde chaya. For those of you who don't speak Yiddish, it literally means be a good person, not a wild animal. And even 5-year-olds know the difference between being a mensch and a wild animal. Rule number 2, do your part to make the world a better place. Rule number 3, try your hardest. Rule number 4, never ever give up. And rule number 5, try and have a good time. And I praised him. I said, great, what do we do when we make a mistake? And he said, we do tzedakah, we do charity. I said, that's right. So here's the way this is going to go. You're going to find this homeless person, and give him a couple of bucks. You're going to look him in the eye. You're going to shake his hand. You're going to say, God bless you and keep you safe. And we eventually found this group of homeless people. There was 3. And Aiden, true to form, marched right up. He gave him a couple bucks. He said, God bless you and keep you safe. He looked him in the eye, shook his hand. And do you know what happened? It was a very awkward moment of silence. Very, very awkward moment of silence. And then literally, he hugged my child. And they start having a good time, and they start chatting. And you could tell this is the first human interaction this guy's had in a very, very long time. A few minutes later, we walk away, and I kneel down, and I say, Aiden, what just happened here? He thought to himself for a moment. He said, Baba, I made the world a better place, and it feels good. And so when I think about that story, and I think about Jewish values, the world according to our sages was built on 3 things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. It was built on Torah, which I equate to values, and values are a universal human yearning. Avodah, hard work. The amount of hard work that has gone into build a country in the last 70 years. It's just what Israel's managed to accomplish in the last 70 years is mind-blowing. If I would have told my Holocaust survivor grandparents that you could board a flight in New York and be in Israel a few hours later, and that it is now a technological powerhouse that is improving the lives of billions of people, they would have thought you were crazy 70 years ago. I mean, this is a country that is 60% desert and is now a water superpower. I mean, that really is, we've got to take a step back and say, we are living in some amazing times. And Gmilut Chasadim, this idea of doing acts of charity. And I will tell you, I wake up many days and I say, Shechianu, I say, I'm very grateful to be living in a time where I get to witness a safe and secure Israel, a country that is really stretching beyond its own borders and improving the lives of its own citizens and those from around the world. And I feel like we are truly living in momentous times. And I am pleased to spend summers here with my children, and I'm pleased to be a witness to this moment in history. As we all are. And for all of the participants today, the next time you come to Israel, I encourage you, go visit United Hatzalah's headquarters and see how Muslims, Christians, and Jews are saving lives. Or go and see where Rebif is created, the drug that treats 600,000 of the 2.5 million individuals that have multiple sclerosis. The two top drugs that are treating multiple sclerosis are coming out of Israel, Copaxone and Rebif. These stories really are. They bring light to the world. And this is a story that is not generally known.
Beautiful. At this time, I would like to open this up for Q&A. I am going to unmute everybody. Did that work? Deborah, you're still muted. You might have to, if you have a question, you would have to, oh, okay. Ruth, you are still muted. And if you want to raise your hand, you could either well, there are a lot of people who called in, but you could either just call out, or the bottom of the screen, it says manage participants. Then when you click on that, you should see your name and you could say raise hand. So if anyone would like to just shout out a question.
And if I could just, if you allow me, I will make one pitch for those of you that are on the call. If you read the book, I have a request. I hope that you will read it and then give it to somebody else. I truly hope that you will give the book to someone else as a gift. Take your copy and give it to someone else, because this is a story that I hope people will be aware of, one. And two, if you wouldn't mind leaving an Amazon review, I would be grateful.
I will give the link to that. I've given out the link, but I will again when I send out the replay. So does anyone have a question?
You would find this fascinating. It's the science and.
Yeah, right now, I'm just wondering about this call. Can I check the answer machine?
I think I may.
Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask?
Right, delete because you said you were on the call.
Tally, do you have a question?
Oh, well, no, I just wanted to actually say we had the honor in Palm Beach Synagogue for Eli Deer had come twice, and the synagogue donated 9 ambucycles to Israel in name of Parkland students who died. So their names are on the ambucycles. So their legacy will be given to Israel.
Very nice. Somebody has a lot of background noise, but does anybody, that's beautiful. That's nice that you got to meet at Eli Deer. Does anybody else have a question? Because I have a ton of questions. If nobody else would like to ask any questions of Avi. 1497, do you have any questions? I saw maybe you started to speak, or maybe it was just background noise. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody again except for Avi, and Avi, I will continue asking you some questions. I'm going to do mute all. And now I will unmute you. Okay, at the end of the book, you couldn't fit everything into the book. But if you could talk about maybe some other innovations, or speak more about some things that we didn't get into detail in this book, maybe talk about, how many people did you interview with this book? And is there anybody who stands out to you as just being amazing? I mean, everybody seems amazing. But where have you traveled also for this book?
So I interviewed, I think it was 100, it was actually a multiple of high. Was it 128, 129 individuals? As it turned out, it really was like a lovely coincidence, multiple times. Many of the individuals in this book were interviewed multiple times. I traveled all over the country, and I met people wherever I could. There, in the back of the book, as you point out, I list 50 innovations. I really felt like it would have been overkill to write. I feature 15. And the whole point of the book is it's a rocking chair book. You can really pick it up anywhere and put it down anywhere. I tend to think that our attention span as adults these days is much, much less than it was years ago. And so the book is written in a style of 3,000-4,000 word chapters so that you could really pick it up and put it down anywhere. It's not, you obviously can read it linearly, but you don't have to read it linearly. Where can I start? I mean, are there any of the 50 you would like for me to talk about? I mean, they all are really, truly extraordinary.
You know, this wasn't at the back of the book. I think it was one of the chapters. I don't know which one it was called, but it was about tracking down, maybe it was how computer people have figured out hacking or computer security and cybersecurity, and how you wrote that during the Holocaust, if information was available of the money that was supporting the Nazi regime, then it might have been taken down, and how.
So I wrote that in the context of my own experience with the Iranian bank issue. I was driven years ago when Iran was marching towards the bomb, and I exposed their bank accounts. What went through my mind was, on a fairly regular basis, what my grandparents went through over the course of the Holocaust. And secondly, if someone would have exposed at the time Nazi bank accounts around the world, would history have been different? And my hope in writing my last book in 2010, Iran's Dirty Banking, was exposing Iranian bank accounts so that the world would stand up and say, enough, we are not going to let them march towards the bomb by leveraging the international financial sector.
Okay, so I guess I'm conflating two books.
You are conflating two books. And then in terms of internet security, that chapter I wrote about Gil Shved. Gil, who I had the pleasure of meeting last week in Tel Aviv, he created the world's first firewall. And of the Fortune 500 companies, I think all of them are using his technology. I mean, the statistics are impressive. There are hundreds of thousands, if not more, companies around the world that are using his technology. And the firewall was created in Israel, and it provides the underlying basis of security as a user on the internet for companies and individuals. And that was created right here in Israel.
Right. That's amazing. Let's see. There are so many quotes in your book that I thought were so great. I mean, the Ben Gurion quote, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. And
that's a classic, right? It really is. If you think about it, I'm sure all of you on the call, or many of you, have come to Israel. This is a country that looks very different than it did 70 years ago. This is a country that is finally coming into its own. It is exciting what we're seeing here. It is very, very exciting.
Yes. And one other part, I have so many flags. It says, where it says, for thousands of years, Jews have been called the people of the book. This part of Israel's culture has been absolutely essential to the country's success. And when a culture couples high-powered education, hard work, and acts of charitable giving and volunteering, there is no stopping the infinite power of what humankind can achieve. I think this is given in so many examples. I read that just with that, the whole world was riveted by that cave situation in Thailand. And I was curious, is Israel technology there? And yes. It was.
It was. So they leveraged tech. So those children in the cave, there was no cell phone reception. So they used technology that allowed these individuals who were trying to save their lives to relay communication back and forth. And that also was Israeli technology.
Yes, I wasn't surprised when I did a search. It was where signals, to get signals where you normally couldn't get a signal.
Correct.
So that was amazing. So what's next for you, Avi? Do you have another book on your plate? Will you be traveling to the U.S. again? You seem to be back and forth.
I live in Washington. The book is now the book has been around for, we're up to 5 months. 5 months today it was released. 5 months ago today it was released, and I've now sold the foreign language rights in 10 languages: Bulgarian, Chinese, Czech, Hebrew, Hindi, Korean, Indonesian, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Romanian. And my hope is I'd like to have this be in 20 to 30 languages. I want to expose these stories of light to the world. I actually just got the Spanish and the Chinese manuscript, and it really was exciting to see the book in Chinese.
Are they receptive to it? Because I would think with it, do you find that there's a correlation between people being interested in the book and people being favorable toward Israel and the Jews, or it's universal, the stories? So
I will tell you that there are delegations that, if I understood your question correctly, there are delegations that come from China, India, and around the world every single week to Israel, I think people are coming here for a few reasons. One, they realize Israel is a highly innovative society, and so they're coming here to really understand what is it that's driving, what is the driving force behind this innovation. And I believe that it's the three things I talked about, which is the prophetic tradition, these strong secular institutions, and diversity. And they're just, the more people are exposed to this idea of that we can use technology, because technology is value neutral, right? It can be used for good or for bad. But when you look at innovations specifically that are meant for saving lives, we have the ability to change cultures. We have the ability to really look at ourselves in terms of as the Jewish people, our mission here, and how we conceive of our own mission, and frankly, how we conceive of the state of Israel. And I hope it inspires people to look at Israel differently.
I don't think this is a well-publicized story in the United States anyway, but the support that Israel gives to the Syrians on the northern border.
So there's a wonderful organization called Israel Flying Aid, which was one of many organizations that was responsible for bringing foodstuffs and medicine and other supplies into Syria. Just 2 weeks ago, there were refugees that came in from Syria into Israel and then transited through to Jordan. Israel is bringing aid to an enemy neighbor. And that really, I believe, speaks volumes to both what the country would look like if it wasn't mired in pretty constant war, and what the Zionist ideal is. Now that ideal is not always manifesting itself here in Israel, as we all know. But people here are striving for a more perfect union, and that is inspiring.
Yes, yes. Well, Avi, thank you so much for joining me today. I absolutely love your book. Although I do have my book here, I will do what you said. I will pass it on.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for joining me here at night in Israel, and I hope everyone here just learned so much from you.
I hope that everyone on the call is inspired, and I hope that you internalize this story, and that is one of the many things that you think about when you think about the state of Israel.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Avi. It's been a pleasure talking and meeting with you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.